At some point, being the smart kid went from getting gold stars on spelling tests to realizing you can't figure out how to budget for groceries without a minor panic attack. The label of gifted was supposed to guarantee success, but here we are in 2025, more burned out and broke than we expected. Researchers have found that early praise mixed with perfectionism often leads to disengagement and burnout later in life. And that plays out most clearly in our financial decisions. We'll unpack how that labeling breaks decision-making and what you can actually do to stop burning out your bank account. Because before the money problems came the identity shift. When smart became your identity. I remember sitting in class and finishing worksheets before anyone else. It wasn't that the problems were complex, it was just ordinary multiplication, but the speed gave it weight. Teachers would notice, hand me an extra sticker, or let me read quietly while the rest of the class worked. For a kid, that felt like winning a game no one had explained the rules to. That kind of recognition doesn't fade quickly. It wasn't only encouragement in the moment, it was a shaping mechanism. Without realizing it, I began to assume that my value was tied to being quick, correct, and ahead of the curve. By the time I was 10, I'd already built a mental story. If I kept being the fastest and the best, everything in life would unfold in my favor. But what happens when the labels that gave you structure don't hold up anymore? The problem is that the identity formed in those early classrooms doesn't map neatly onto adulthood. Suddenly, the sense of control you felt when handed a worksheet disappears the moment you're staring at medical bills, contracts, or rent notices. There are no gold stars, no teacher confirming you're right, and no bonus prize for being first. Real life rarely comes with a single correct choice, and that disconnect is jarring. Research backs this up. Children labeled as gifted often internalize the idea that their worth hinges on flawless performance, which means unpredictable, ambiguous adult problems land as existential threats rather than just challenges to solve. That's exactly what happens with money. The child who raced through worksheets grows into an adult who freezes at the thought of picking the right investment account. On the surface, it looks like procrastination, but really it's fear. If your identity is staked on always being correct, then every uncertain financial decision feels like a trap waiting to expose you. And once you've stalled for weeks comparing options on interest rates, the situation often gets worse. Cleverness does nothing against late fees or missed opportunities. Money doesn't wait for you to feel certain. The irony is that what feels like being responsible through endless analysis ends up costing you more. Later on, I'll show you how small tools, like automating contributions or testing low-stakes options, can short-circuit that paralysis, but at the time, none of us were prepared. The pressure runs deeper because it was wired so early. Kids praised for right answers learn to link their sense of being valued with performance before they even understand what that does long-term. It doesn't feel harmful when you're young. It feels like attention and care. But it's planting the idea that love and respect are earned only by staying ahead. That script doesn't vanish in adulthood. It mutates. Now, instead of wanting your teacher to notice, you find yourself needing co-workers, supervisors, or even your own inner critic to keep confirming that you're still the smart one. You take fewer risks, you hide small mistakes, and you overcompensate by overpreparing even when it slows you down. Every choice becomes a referendum. If this goes wrong, maybe I was never gifted after all. That's why routine financial matters, which should sit in the category of simple logistics, feel like psychological landmines. It's not about laziness, though it often gets misread that way. It's self-preservation. Avoiding a budgeting app, putting off salary negotiations, or ignoring unopened bills isn't disinterest. It's an attempt to protect an identity. Because if you try and slip up, the narrative isn't, "This is a small mistake I'll fix." It's, "I was never special, and now I have proof." That framing turns every spreadsheet or payment into a high-stakes exam. Line items and due dates warp into symbols of self-worth. And because the original training was individualistic, you alone against the worksheet. You never got practice in living with messy, shared, or unpredictable outcomes. In school, whether you got something right depended on the answer you wrote, not the whims of the economy, the timing of a medical emergency, or whether your workplace cut budgets overnight. But adult life runs on those variables. That gap means when something external hits, like one hospital bill wiping out your savings, you don't register it as bad luck. You don't say, "This was outside my control." You translate it into a personal flaw. Each uncontrollable hit feels like evidence that the identity you carried for years is cracking. And the damage to your financial resilience is compounded by that story you keep telling yourself. A lot of us went through childhood with an almost unshakable trust in our own abilities. Failures were rare and easy to rebound from. But when adulthood arrives, failures land harder because they strike at a part of you that always assumed competence guaranteed success. That sense of certainty is gone, and in its place is suspicion. If I was so gifted, why do I feel like I'm barely keeping up? It explains why something as small as an overdraft fee or a bounced rent payment can spiral weeks of doubt. It isn't just a financial inconvenience. It shakes your sense of who you are. Careers, relationships, even personal confidence slip under that same umbrella of questioning. From there grows a pattern of self-sabotage. You might spend an entire month obsessively comparing banks to find the account with the best savings rate, while missing the reality that simply not saving at all is doing the most damage. It's not that you lack numerical skills, you probably overcomprehend them. But the fear of making a wrong move paralyzes you until indecision becomes its own form of loss. And afterward, the guilt loops back into doubt. You beat yourself up for wasting time, and that judgment only makes you more hesitant when the next decision comes. What looks like overthinking is really a fragile cycle of protecting identity at the cost of progress. Even in ordinary social dynamics, this shows up. Friends might casually pick a dinner spot together, but if you're locked into proving you're always making the best choice, you can overburden it, as if the restaurant defines you. In small matters, the cost is only awkwardness. With financial responsibilities, it becomes riskier. Every recurring bill, every signed contract, every work negotiation carries disproportionate weight. Where most people accept that mistakes are part of the process, for you a single misstep feels catastrophic. That makes it harder to take steady action, which ironically is the very thing that produces consistent growth over time. Being told you were smart as a child wasn't harmful in itself. The trouble came from how tightly it framed self-definition. That framework pushed intelligence into a fragile loop. Achievement meant validation, and mistakes felt like collapse. Once finances entered that picture, with their constant ambiguity and absence of simple right answers, the loop was guaranteed to break down. The mismatch between expectations of certainty and realities left many of us stalled, earning less, and carrying quiet shame about not meeting the future we once imagined. What it produced wasn't adults lacking skill or drive. It was adults unprepared for environments where results are unpredictable and validation is invisible. Paying off debt doesn't spark public applause, setting aside money isn't noticed, and even getting a raise doesn't have the clear winner's glow that childhood achievements carried. That gap destabilizes the system the identity was built on, leaving each decision to feel heavier than it might for someone without that conditioning. And so the cycle repeats. Intelligence is still there, motivation remains, but the scaffolding you relied on no longer fits the frame of adult reality. When those mismatches pile up, they don't just threaten your budget, they lead to questioning whether you ever were who you believed as a child. That disorientation builds, and soon the problem isn't only individual choices. It's the environment you now find yourself in, surrounded by peers who throw off your expectations in entirely new ways. The crash of the middle-of-the-pack moment. There's a moment almost every former gifted kid runs into. The crash of realizing you're no longer the smartest in the room. For years you probably lived with the sense that life was a steady upward climb. Grades, awards, and small wins kept reinforcing the story. The pattern felt reliable, almost permanent. But eventually, whether in a packed lecture hall, a demanding workplace, or even a casual team meeting, you notice something shifts. Suddenly, ability alone no longer sets you apart. You're surrounded by people just as talented, and sometimes more disciplined. The straight line you relied on breaks, and for the first time, being average feels like a personal collapse instead of a neutral fact. What makes this moment hit so hard is that it doesn't just challenge what you can do, it challenges who you think you are. When the foundation of your confidence rests on outpacing everyone else, discovering that you're matched or even outperformed feels like ground slipping away. It might look ordinary from the outside, but inside, it feels like a collapse of identity. You start to wonder if all those years of praise were misplaced. If others are just as quick or capable, maybe you were never exceptional in the first place. That line of thinking wounds in ways grades or salaries alone never could, because it cuts at the core story of being the smart one. The internal fallout is subtle at first. Instead of raising your hand, you pause and let others speak. Instead of submitting a draft confidently, you revise it endlessly, waiting until it feels flawless. You tell yourself this hyper-attention is diligence, but beneath it lives a different fear. If this idea isn't perfect, people will see through me. What follows is a predictable cycle: overworking on tasks, procrastinating when the weight feels too heavy, then criticizing yourself for avoiding the work until you start over again. And this isn't just anecdotal. Clinical and educational research consistently links unhealthy perfectionism to academic burnout, stalled progress, and even underachievement in high performers. In other words, it's not that you suddenly lack intelligence. It's that the survival strategy built in childhood, proving worth through perfect results, stops working once the environment demands something different. This is how imposter syndrome finds fertile ground. Every ordinary misstep becomes proof that maybe you were never that gifted. Miss a deadline, misinterpret instructions, stumble during a presentation. What others might see as routine errors, you magnify into verdicts on your entire ability. It's not about the mistake itself, it's about what it seems to reveal. Meanwhile, you look around and assume others don't share this struggle because they appear composed. You ignore the dozens of solid things you deliver and obsess only over the slip-ups, reinforcing the suspicion that you no longer measure up. What often goes unsaid is that this isn't an intelligence problem, it's a mindset problem. Experts like Carol Dweck point to the difference between fixed and growth mindsets as crucial here. If you were raised in a fixed framework, where mistakes threaten identity because ability is seen as static, then being middle of the pack feels unbearable. By contrast, people with a growth mindset experience setbacks as learning signals, not identity threats. They frame mistakes as essential steps in development rather than proof they don't belong. That simple reframe, research shows, is often the main difference between those who adapt and those who spiral. The refusal to reframe leads to perfectionism intensifying. You work longer hours, polish projects endlessly, and second-guess decisions, believing more effort can manufacture the uniqueness you once relied on. But there's a hidden cost. Unfinished projects pile up, half-written reports sit abandoned, applications never get submitted. In workplaces, that looks like inconsistency. In education, it looks like wasted potential. The paradox is painful. Your intelligence is visible, but the fear of being exposed causes delays that erode trust. Over time, missed opportunities, deadlines, and promotions don't trace back to ability. They stem from this hesitation cycle. And as the cycle continues, the emotional toll builds. The stress of trying to embody a perfect identity leaves you exhausted, but it also changes how you interpret opportunities. A promotion no longer looks exciting. It feels like another chance to be unmasked. A project no longer looks manageable. It feels like a trap waiting to document failure. Even praise feels fragile, as though it could be revoked the instant you slip. What began as drive quietly mutates into fear, and that fear drains more energy than the actual work. Here's the overlooked reality. Being average in a new arena isn't decline, it's scale. Moving from a small pond to an ocean means the field is filled with equally strong peers. It doesn't mean you lack skill. But with gifted conditioning, you don't see it as expansion, you see it as exposure. That mindset explains why people who once led the classroom pull back in later education, or why bright new hires quietly stall when their first job demands collaboration instead of solo output. The problem isn't that they ran out of talent. It's that their sense of success hasn't updated to match the new environment. Think about how group work shifts in meaning. As a child, group assignments might have felt like dead weight. You carried the project to keep your record spotless. But later, collaboration isn't optional. Success depends on distributing strengths and relying on others. If your definition of intelligence never expanded to include integrating with peers, you read their ability as competition, not compliment. That mindset can quietly sabotage careers because advancement beyond the classroom usually requires cooperation, not outperformance. Breaking this cycle begins with accepting a hard truth. The standout identity you built in childhood doesn't map onto adult success. Continuing to measure yourself by being the fastest or most perfect only guarantees frustration. Research on performance and long-term achievement shows that adaptability, persistence, and collaboration matter more than raw quickness. Shifting into that mindset doesn't erase intelligence, it puts it back to work. The most reliable growth comes from finishing projects, learning through errors, and building trust over time. None of that thrives if your measuring stick never updates. But most people aren't told how to adjust this story. Institutions reward competition, not recalibration. That leaves you with a quiet humiliation. The real obstacle isn't knowledge or skill, it's perspective. And admitting that feels uncomfortable when you were praised for being ahead of the curve. You think you're supposed to already get it, but avoidance doesn't fix the disconnect. If anything, denial fuels the identity loop, keeping adults stuck in cycles of doubt long after their performance has earned them credibility. The crash of the middle-of-the-pack moment, then, isn't about losing intelligence. It's about facing the collapse of an outdated identity. That collapse hurts more than bad grades or missed jobs because it forces you to rethink the core story you've carried from childhood. If gifted meant always standing out, then standing among equals feels like proof of failure. The irony is that the very traits that build long-term success, resilience, flexibility, learning from missteps, aren't nurtured by always being ahead. They develop only when you can stand among equals without seeing it as defeat. That shift doesn't mean letting go of intelligence, it means using it differently. When you redefine success as contribution, completion, and learning, you loosen the grip of perfectionism. You stop holding projects hostage until they're flawless, and instead release them when they're useful. You move forward even without certainty, because progress itself confirms capability. That reframing separates those who burn out from those who eventually stabilize. It's not who scored highest as kids, it's who could rewrite the story when the old one no longer fit. And once you recognize this, the new perspective unlocks something practical. Being average in a big arena isn't a condemnation. It's evidence you've reached a bigger stage. The rules have changed, the competition is balanced, and the challenge now includes persistence, collaboration, and emotional resilience. For many, that feels unfair compared to the early days of constant wins. But acceptance beats denial. Because in the domains that decide careers and finances, learning inside a crowded field is not failure. It's the start of growth. If perfectionism and this identity trap are the problem, what actually helps? We'll show 3 microsteps that build confidence without risking your whole life savings. Burnout and your bank account. Burnout doesn't just leave you tired, it shows up in your bank balance. When your energy is low, it doesn't only affect productivity at work. It changes all the small day-to-day money choices. The nights you're too exhausted to cook, you order takeout. The week's bills pile up unopened until late fees hit. None of these decisions feel like a crisis in the moment, yet they accumulate. Research on workplace burnout shows it often increases avoidance behavior and reduces attention to routine financial tasks. In other words, the same drained state that makes it hard to start a new project at work also makes you delay something as basic as paying utilities or checking bank statements. Over time, a run of those short-term choices erodes savings faster than any single big mistake. Behind it all is decision fatigue. When you're burned out, you focus on the path of least resistance. Instead of comparing plans or setting up a proper budget, you tell yourself you'll do it later, when you can do it properly. Later rarely comes, so the budget remains undone. The opportunity costs stack up. Subscriptions renew without notice, interest charges accrue, and discounts go unused. Burnout isn't simply about being tired. It locks you into survival mode. The result is short-term relief, but long-term financial loss. The irony for those raised as gifted is that perfectionism amplifies the trap. You don't just want a budget, you want to create the perfect spreadsheet. Since that feels impossible when you're drained, you avoid it entirely, which is the very behavior that costs you the most. The same dynamic appears in career paths. Frequent job changes, often driven by burnout, can reduce earned raises and the steady continuity that leads to long-term compensation growth. A single switch can sometimes pay off, but repeatedly escaping roles because the workload feels unmanageable creates instability. Employers notice patterns, and rapid exits make advancement harder. Gaps between jobs, missed retirement contributions, and stalled promotion momentum all impose financial costs that may not be obvious year by year, but become significant over a decade. Studies of high-ability adults have documented this pattern. Career instability and underemployment are common when early promise collides with exhaustion and identity strain. Burnout might whisper that leaving is the quick fix, yet many find they reset too often to build sustainable wealth. It doesn't always look like movement, though. On the quieter end, burnout appears as paralysis. You know you should compare credit cards or set up a retirement account, but the paperwork feels impossible at the end of a draining week. So you leave it. Switching to a cheaper phone plan would save money, but the thought of researching terms feels unbearable. And so weeks extend into months. Missing 1 year of retirement contributions doesn't sound catastrophic, but finance runs on compounding. Those lost months delay growth in ways you only recognize too late. The habits of waiting for energy later accumulate as thousands of dollars missing from future stability. What looks like procrastination is in fact the visible mark of burnout's toll. Spending patterns also shift under constant fatigue. A small reward purchased online feels like a substitute for rest you never got. Delivery showing up at the doorstep tomorrow makes the week more bearable. The same is true with entertainment, subscriptions, or nights out. None inherently destructive, but their role changes. They function not as occasional treats, but as coping mechanisms. When coping becomes the pattern, the financial drain is constant. And what follows is a cycle familiar to anyone who's lived it. Spend to relieve exhaustion, feel temporary relief, then feel guilty as money runs short, only to repeat the pattern once stress returns. Burnout directs not only your energy, but your budget. Work environments can fuel this imbalance. Many burned-out professionals overcompensate by saying yes to every task, working overtime without pay, or pushing themselves to prove they're not slipping. From the outside, it looks like productivity. Financially, it's self-defeating. Hours spent on unpaid work could have gone toward training for a certification, developing a side income stream, or simply resting to make better decisions tomorrow. Overwork should build equity in your career, but when it comes without boundaries, it reinforces stagnation. You remain locked in lower value cycles, substituting constant activity for growth. Slowly, the years spent surviving deplete not only energy but professional and financial horizons. Another overlooked cost is the delay of advancement. Fatigue makes applying for the next role or negotiating a raise feel impossible. You tell yourself you'll try once the exhaustion eases, yet the easing never comes. While you wait for the right moment, peers apply, receive promotions, and stack incremental raises. The difference isn't intelligence. It's persistence powered by enough rest to follow through. The gap is invisible until you notice years of under-earning compared to colleagues who weren't necessarily more skilled, but simply consistent. Consistency matters because finance compounds not just in savings, but in career value. Regular raises, steady retirement deposits, and durable employment records pay off through momentum. Burnout disrupts momentum first. Budgets collapse each time exhaustion peaks. Automatic transfers don't build because you dip into them for temporary relief. You step away from jobs right as higher salaries become possible. From the outside, the career looks scattered. From the inside, it feels like survival. Both perspectives are true. But the financial cost measured in lost continuity dwarfs any single purchase mistake. At its core, this is why many formerly gifted adults find themselves financially behind despite decent salaries. The issue isn't lack of intelligence, but unrecognized energy loss guiding decisions. Instead of one steady path upward, life becomes a stop-and-start cycle of effort and withdrawal. Each reset carries financial weight: missed salary progression, lost compounding, delayed stability. On spreadsheets, it looks like under-earning. In lived experience, it feels like constantly running on empty. And for both, the math adds up the same way: less net worth over time. The harsh truth is that burnout and finances amplify each other in feedback loops. Exhaustion drives short-term money choices that shrink financial margins. Then financial stress heightens strain, worsening exhaustion. Bills cause sleepless nights. Sleepless nights erode performance. Weak performance deepens burnout, and the cycle accelerates. Meanwhile, spending to escape worsens cash flow, making the stress harder to solve. Outsiders may assume irresponsibility, but the experience is closer to survival mode. Short-term choices feel like the only option available, even as long-term harm accumulates. None of this means the spiral is unavoidable. Evidence shows that even very small shifts protect against the worst damage. One example supported by behavioral finance research: automation. Automatically paying one bill or transferring a reduced, fixed amount into savings removes the need for decision-making in low-energy states. Another small step is adopting a simplified budgeting habit, tracking only one category of expense rather than everything at once. These are not dramatic overhauls, they are friction reducers. Their value lies in sidestepping the fatigue barrier that blocks more elaborate plans. Even one automated transfer compounds over time, preventing the slow bleed that burnout otherwise ensures. The important recognition is that burnout's cost isn't abstract. It turns into late fees, lower salaries, missed raises, and diminished growth. You see it in the gap between what your skills could earn and what actually accrues in your account. And because intelligence makes it easy to rationalize, telling yourself you'll fix it once you're less busy, you risk ignoring real losses mounting now. Burnout is not neutral. It leaks money through avoidance, inconsistency, and coping. And unless put in check, those leaks grow into long-term setbacks that feel invisible until they are already built into your financial future. If burnout is draining your savings, one immediate step is to automate a single payment this week.